Aiden, a young human soldier, stepped nervously into the grand chamber. His heart raced as he took in the sight before him. The room was enormous, decorated with alien symbols he couldn't quite understand. The air was thick with the scent of strange flowers, and the walls were covered in holographic images of distant stars. But nothing in the room could compare to the figure standing at the center, Queen Vera. She stood tall, radiating power and grace, her piercing eyes locked on Aiden, as if she could see right through him. Her skin shimmered with a light shade of green, and her long hair floated slightly, as if suspended in the air. Aiden knew she was the most feared ruler in the galaxy, yet there was something in her gaze that made him uneasy. The door shut behind him with a soft hiss, echoing in the silence. Aiden stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do next. He had been sent here on a diplomatic mission to negotiate a peace treaty between his people, the humans, and the alien empire ruled by Queen Vera. The tensions between the two races had been building for years, and Aiden knew this was a critical moment. As he walked toward the queen, he tried to mask the anger bubbling inside him. His people had suffered under the alien empire's rule for far too long. Whole cities had been destroyed and innocent lives lost. His anger was just beneath the surface, but he fought to keep it under control. He had to remain professional, even if he wanted to shout at her. Queen Vera watched him with a calm, almost amused expression. Her eyes narrowed, and a soft voice, full of authority, broke the silence. "Human, why are you looking at me with anger?" Aiden froze. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't realized his gaze had betrayed his emotions. The queen had seen it instantly, and she wasn't asking with curiosity. She was demanding an explanation. Aiden took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He knew he had to answer, but the words were caught in his throat. How could he explain the rage he felt without risking everything? How could he tell her about the countless lives lost, the families torn apart by her people's wars? I don't mean to offend you," he finally said, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "But my people have suffered, and I can't ignore that. I'm here to negotiate, not to make peace with a monster." The words were out before he could stop them. Aiden immediately regretted his choice, but it was too late. He looked up to see Queen Vera's expression unchanged, as if she had expected this. The silence stretched on, the weight of Aiden's words hanging in the air. He had spoken his truth, but now he wondered if it had cost him the chance for diplomacy. The queen didn't seem angry. She merely tilted her head, her gaze softer now, almost thoughtful. "You speak of suffering," she said slowly. "But have you ever considered the suffering of the ones you call monsters?" Aiden's heart skipped a beat. There was something in her voice that made him pause. For a moment, he forgot about the anger, his thoughts racing. Could it be that the queen, the ruler of this vast empire, felt something more than the cold power he had imagined? Aiden stood there, uncertain of how to respond. Queen Vera's words echoed in his mind, and for a moment, he found himself lost in thought. Was she trying to show empathy, or was it just another clever tactic to throw him off balance? He couldn't be sure. The queen's gaze never left him, sharp and calculating. She was not a woman who showed weakness, and her every movement commanded respect. Aiden had heard stories of her strength, how she had led her empire through countless wars, how her enemies had trembled at the mere thought of facing her. There was no doubt that she was a formidable ruler. But in that moment, Aiden wondered if there was something more to her than the cold, unfeeling leader he had imagined. He could see the weight of responsibility in her eyes, something that spoke of more than just power. It spoke of the burden she carried as the queen of an empire. Aiden shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, his frustration rising once more. He had come here to negotiate peace, yet everything about this encounter felt wrong. He was supposed to represent his people, to stand firm against the queen's empire. But the queen wasn't acting like the ruthless leader he had expected. Instead, she seemed human in a way. "I didn't come here to talk about suffering," Aiden finally said, his voice a little harsher than he intended. "I came here to stop the suffering of my people. Your empire has destroyed everything in its path. My people are dying because of you, and now you want to talk about your suffering. What about us?" Vera's eyes darkened, but there was no anger in her expression. Instead, there was something more complicated, something Aiden couldn't quite place. "I did not ask for your sympathy, human," she replied, her voice smooth yet tinged with a quiet power. "But you should understand that power comes with a cost. My empire is not built on peace and harmony. It is built on survival. Survival in a universe where weakness is punished." Aiden frowned. He couldn't imagine the kind of world the Queen had come from. One where survival was so constant a struggle. But that didn't excuse what her empire had done. "You talk about survival," he said, his tone hardening, "but your empire doesn't care about survival. It cares about control. It cares about conquest. And my people are paying the price for it." Vera's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Aiden thought he had pushed her too far. But then she took a step toward him, her eyes narrowing in a way that sent a chill down his spine. "You misunderstand, human," she said quietly. "My empire does not conquer for the sake of power. It conquers because without strength, we would cease to exist. The galaxy does not show mercy to those who are weak." Aiden's anger flared, but there was something in her voice that stopped him. She wasn't lying. He could hear the truth in her words. Her empire had survived by force, and that made her who she was. But it didn't make it right. "Then what do you want from me?" Aiden asked, his voice quiet now. The edge of his anger dulled. "Do you want me to understand your suffering too? To accept that what your empire has done is somehow justified?" Vera's gaze softened just slightly. "I want you to understand that the path to peace is not one-sided, human. If you are to be the key to ending this war, you must first understand the burden of both sides." Aiden was silent. The Queen's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Was she asking for peace, or was she simply playing a game? He couldn't tell yet, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. He had come to negotiate, but it seemed he might have to do more than that. He might have to listen, and that was something he hadn't prepared for. Aiden's thoughts were racing. He had come to this chamber with the belief that he would be meeting a cold, calculating queen, someone to defeat, to stop. But what he was facing now was far more complex. Queen Vera wasn't just the leader of an empire. She was a woman caught in a web of survival, one who had her own struggles, her own burdens. Aiden shifted uncomfortably, his frustration bubbling up again. How could he negotiate with someone like this? Someone who saw power as the only way to survive in this galaxy. "You say the path to peace is not one-sided," he said, trying to steady his voice. "But how can it be fair when one side holds all the power? Your empire crushes anyone who stands in its way." Vera's eyes flashed, but her expression remained calm. She had expected this. The human had the fire of someone who had suffered, who had lost everything. But she would not back down. She could not. "The path to peace is never fair, human," she said. "It's about understanding the price of strength. My empire was built on the need to survive, not out of a desire to crush others. Your people misunderstand the cost of living in a universe like this." Aiden clenched his fists, trying not to let his anger spill over. "But your people didn't just survive. They destroyed. They conquered. And now you want me to understand that. To feel sorry for you." Vera regarded him for a long moment, as if she were measuring him, weighing his words. "I'm not asking for your sympathy," she said quietly. "I'm asking for your understanding. If you want peace, you must first understand why war happens, why empires rise, why we must fight. The reason is not always greed. Sometimes it's because if we do not, we perish." Aiden looked at her, his chest tight. He had heard these words before, from the mouths of leaders who justified war with excuses. But this time, there was something different about the Queen's voice. It wasn't just empty rhetoric. It was real. She truly believed what she was saying. I don't need your justification, he said, forcing the words out. My people don't need excuses. They need peace. They need an end to the killing. Vera's gaze softened, but her words were still firm. If peace were so easy, it would have come long ago. You cannot stop war with just words, Aiden. You cannot end bloodshed with promises. There is always a price. Aiden didn't know how to respond. The Queen's words were heavy, their meaning sinking deep into his mind. Could it really be this complicated? Was peace really so impossible? She stepped closer to him, her presence dominating the space around them. If you want to find peace, you must first accept that the road to it is paved with sacrifice. It is paved with difficult choices, and only when you understand that will you truly be able to negotiate for peace. Aiden swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had come here to end the war, but it seemed that in order to do that, he would have to face his own beliefs, his own assumptions about what it meant to win and what it meant to lose. I'm not ready to accept that, he muttered, but I'm willing to listen. The Queen nodded slowly, as though she had expected nothing less. Good. Listening is the first step toward understanding, and understanding is the first step toward peace. Aiden took a deep breath, the tension still heavy in the room. He hadn't expected this kind of conversation. He hadn't expected the Queen to challenge him this way. But he had no choice now but to stay. The future of both their people depended on it. Aiden stood there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The Queen's words lingered in his mind like a heavy fog. He had come into her presence ready for a battle of words, but instead he found himself questioning everything he had believed about the war, about the aliens, and even about himself. Vera's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. She had watched Aiden closely throughout their conversation, noting the struggle in his eyes, the way his anger seemed to rise and fall in waves. She had expected resistance, but she also saw something else in him, a human, just like the others, fighting for survival. But there was a quiet strength there too, something that set him apart from the rest. You are not like the others, she said quietly, breaking the silence. Aiden looked up, confused. What do you mean? He asked, his voice weary. You carry anger, but you also carry something else, she said, almost thoughtfully. A desire for something more. A desire for peace, for something better than what we have. That makes you different from the ones who only know how to fight. Aiden frowned. I don't want war. But my people have been pushed too far. I don't know how to make peace with someone like you. Someone who commands an empire built on conquest. Vera nodded slowly, her expression serious. I understand your doubt, Aiden. You see me as an enemy, and perhaps that is the role I've always played in your world. But I am more than the title you've assigned to me. I did not choose this life, and I did not choose the wars that have come with it. Survival is all I know. Aiden felt a strange twinge of sympathy, though he quickly pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to let himself feel sorry for her. The galaxy had suffered too much for him to let go of his anger now. But even so, there was something about her words that made him pause. Perhaps, just perhaps, the Queen wasn't the heartless villain he had imagined. Then why continue this fight? Aiden asked, his voice quieter now. The edge of anger replaced by something else. Curiosity. Why keep conquering if it's all about survival? Can't there be another way? Vera looked down at the ground, as though weighing his question. She had never been asked that before, not by anyone who wasn't trying to manipulate her for their own gain. But Aiden wasn't trying to use her. He was genuinely asking. Because in this galaxy, Aiden, she said, her voice low, peace doesn't come without sacrifice. Strength is the only thing that ensures survival. Without it, we are at the mercy of those who would take everything from us. Aiden wanted to argue, to insist that peace should be possible without war. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized she wasn't speaking from a place of malice. She was speaking from experience, from years of ruling an empire where weakness meant death. She wasn't defending conquest. She was defending the survival of her people. For the first time, Aiden felt the weight of her responsibility, the burden of the crown she wore. It wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a symbol of the countless lives she had sacrificed to ensure her people's survival. They stood in silence for a long moment, neither one of them speaking. Aiden felt a sense of understanding growing between them, something that neither of them had expected. It wasn't friendship, and it certainly wasn't trust, but it was something important, something that could change the course of the war. "Maybe we're not so different after all," Aiden said quietly. "Maybe both of our people have been trapped in this fight for too long." Vera looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps, but knowing that does not make the war any easier to end." Aiden nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. The path to peace was still unclear, but one thing was certain. They had both taken the first step. The tension in the room was thick as Aiden and Queen Vera stood facing one another. They had just shared a moment of understanding, something neither of them had expected. But the silence between them now felt heavier than before, as though something was looming, waiting to break the fragile peace they had just begun to build. Aiden glanced at the Queen, his mind still racing with the realization that she wasn't just a ruthless ruler. She was someone who had carried the weight of her people's survival for years, someone who understood what it meant to make difficult choices. But that understanding did little to ease the anger that still burned inside him. His people were suffering. The galaxy was suffering. And no matter how much he wanted to see her as an ally, the reality was that the war still raged on. The door to the chamber suddenly slid open, and a tall alien officer stepped in. His sharp, calculating eyes immediately locked onto Aiden. Aiden's stomach tightened. He had seen this officer before. He was one of Vera's most trusted commanders, known for his ruthlessness. "My queen," the officer said, bowing slightly, but his gaze never left Aiden. "The council has heard of your conversation with the human. They are not pleased." Aiden stiffened, his heart racing. He knew what this meant. The council would never tolerate this kind of diplomacy. They saw the human as an enemy, not as a potential ally. They saw peace as weakness. Vera turned to face the officer, her expression hardening. "The council is always displeased with anything that doesn't align with their interests," she replied coolly. "What of it?" The officer's lips twisted into a thin smile, one that didn't reach his cold eyes. "They believe it is time to make a decision, my queen. The war cannot continue with such uncertainty. You must choose a side, human or empire." Aiden's breath caught in his throat. It was a threat, pure and simple. The council was demanding loyalty from the queen, and it seemed they weren't willing to tolerate her attempts at peace with the humans any longer. Vera stood tall, her regal presence unshaken, but Aiden could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands tightened into fists at her sides. She was trapped. The queen had spoken of survival, of sacrifices, but now it seemed she would have to make one of her own. "You are not in charge of this empire," she said, her voice like steel. "I am." The officer didn't flinch. "Perhaps," he said, his tone icy. "But the empire is in charge of you, and the empire has decided. The human must die." Aiden's blood ran cold. He had been prepared for a lot of things, but not this. The queen had spoken of peace, of understanding, but now it seemed like her words were just that, words. The cold, hard truth was that the empire wanted him dead. Before Aiden could react, Vera stepped forward, blocking the officer's path. "No," she said firmly. "This human will not die. Not by my orders." For a moment, Aiden thought he saw something in her eyes, an unspoken apology. She didn't want this. She didn't want to betray him. But the pressure from her council was overwhelming. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Then you choose him over us, over the future of the empire." Vera didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was a decision in itself. Aiden's heart sank. He had come here hoping for peace, but now he realized how deeply entrenched the war was. There was no easy way out. Peace was not a simple solution. It was a battle, one that would take every ounce of strength and sacrifice they both had. As the officer turned and walked out of the room, Aiden couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal. He had trusted the Queen, believed in the possibility of change. But now, the future seemed uncertain, and the path to peace was more dangerous than ever. Vera turned to Aiden, her face as unreadable as ever. "You may want to leave," she said quietly. "The council will not stop. They will come for you." Aiden swallowed hard. "Then I'll stay. I won't run." Vera's eyes softened for a brief moment, but the weight of their situation pressed down on both of them. The war was far from over, and the price of peace had just become much higher. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air as Aiden stood there, watching Queen Vera. The officer's threat still echoed in his mind. It felt like everything was unraveling too fast. The fragile peace they had started to build seemed more like a distant dream now. Vera's eyes, once cold and calculating, now seemed distant, lost in thought. She wasn't the same leader who had threatened him in the beginning. Aiden could see that now. But her position, her responsibility, still held her back. She was trapped between the empire she led and the new understanding she was beginning to have about humans. "You don't have to do this," Aiden said quietly, his voice steady. "You don't have to follow orders from a council that only wants war. You have the power to change this. You've shown me that." Vera's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't speak right away. She stood, tall and unyielding, the weight of her crown on her shoulders. It was clear that the idea of changing her empire's path was not something she took lightly. She had never been allowed to show weakness, not even in private. "This empire was not built on weakness, Aiden," she finally said. "For generations, we fought to survive. We do what we must to ensure our future. I cannot simply abandon that, even for the chance of peace." Aiden's eyes softened. He had seen her as an enemy, someone who had caused pain to his people. But now, seeing the conflict inside her, he realized something. She wasn't just a ruler. She was a person, torn between her duty and a growing desire for something different. He had expected her to be ruthless, to destroy without hesitation. But in that moment, he saw that her strength came with a price. The price of never showing vulnerability. "I get it," Aiden said, taking the step closer. "I get that you've had to make hard choices. We've all had to. But maybe we don't have to keep fighting. Maybe there's another way. A way where we both survive without bloodshed." Vera's gaze shifted away from him, and for a moment, Aiden thought she wouldn't respond. But then she met his eyes, her expression softer than he had ever seen it. "I've spent my entire life fighting, Aiden," she said quietly. "The Empire, my people, they only understand strength. I am a queen because I have shown them power. But it's never been enough. The wars, the bloodshed, none of it has ever brought me peace. And now I'm wondering if it ever will." Aiden felt his heart ache. He hadn't expected her to open up to him. In that moment, he saw the weight of her responsibilities, how she had never been allowed to truly be herself. Everything had always been about survival. Everything had always been about winning. "You're not alone in this," Aiden said, his voice firm. "You don't have to do this alone." For the first time, a flicker of something like hope crossed Vera's face. It was so brief that Aiden almost missed it. But it was there. It was as if she had been holding her breath, waiting for someone to offer her an out, a way to end the endless cycle of war. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the hope vanished. She straightened, the queen once again, determined and unyielding. "If I give up now," she said, her voice strong but tinged with uncertainty, "I risk everything. My people will never forgive me. The council will strip me of everything I have worked for." Aiden nodded slowly, understanding the depth of her struggle. She had no easy choices, but he also knew that there had to be another way. They had to find it together. "You won't be alone in this," he repeated. I'll help you. I'll fight by your side. If we're going to change things, it has to be both of us." Vera's eyes searched his face, and for a long moment there was nothing but silence. Then she took a deep breath and nodded once, the slightest movement, but it meant everything. "We will try," she said quietly. "But know this, Aiden. This path will not be easy. It may cost us everything. Are you truly willing to risk that?" Aiden's heart pounded in his chest. He had no answers, no guarantees. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to back down now. "I'm ready," he said firmly. "Let's take the first step together." Vera studied him for another moment. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Aiden followed, his mind racing with the possibilities. Peace wasn't guaranteed, but at least now they were fighting for the same cause. The days that followed were tense. Aiden and Vera had made a silent pact, one neither of them fully understood but both of them felt. They would try to end the war, try to find a way to live in peace, but with every passing moment, the pressure around them only grew heavier. Aiden spent his days meeting with the Queen's advisors, who seemed to view him as both a nuisance and a threat. Despite their attempts at diplomacy, it was clear that the Council's loyalty to Vera was fading. They saw her willingness to engage with the human as weakness, and in their eyes, weakness was a fatal flaw for any ruler, especially one who led an empire as powerful as theirs. Vera was no fool. She knew the stakes. She could feel the whispers behind her back, the growing distrust from those who had once followed her without question. They wanted power. They wanted war. And they would stop at nothing to get it. One evening, after a particularly harsh meeting with her council, Vera came to Aiden, her face set in grim determination. He could see the strain in her eyes, the weight of her crown bearing down on her shoulders. "Aiden," she said, her voice low and steady, "I need to make a choice. The Council will never accept peace. They will never allow us to negotiate with the humans. They would rather see the Empire burn than lose their power." Aiden met her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what she was about to say. "If I want to save you, and myself, I will have to give up everything." Vera continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will have to make a sacrifice that will change the course of this war. If I'm not willing to make that sacrifice, then we will never have peace." Aiden felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He knew what she was implying. She was willing to risk everything, her throne, her empire, for the chance of peace. But could he ask her to do that? Could he stand by and watch her destroy everything she had built just for a slim chance of ending the conflict? "You don't have to do this," Aiden said, his voice tight with emotion. "You don't have to sacrifice yourself. There has to be another way." Vera shook her head, her eyes flashing with a mix of sadness and resolve. "There is no other way. My people will not accept anything less. If I don't show them strength, they will tear everything apart." Aiden wanted to argue, to tell her that she didn't have to carry the weight of an entire empire on her own. But deep down, he knew she was right. Her people would never listen to a queen who showed weakness, and if she didn't act now, the war would continue, claiming more lives, including their own. "I won't let you do this alone," Aiden said, stepping closer to her. "If this is the path you choose, then I'll walk it with you, together." Vera looked at him, her expression softening for the briefest moment. "You are a brave man, Aiden, but this sacrifice is mine to make." And just like that, the decision was made. Vera would go before the council and take the blame for everything. She would bear the consequences of peace herself, knowing full well that might cost her the throne. She would risk everything for a future that she wasn't sure would even exist. Aiden couldn't help but feel a sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. He knew the stakes were high, but now, more than ever, the path ahead seemed uncertain. But one thing was clear: the road to peace was no longer just a political choice. It was a personal one, and it was going to take everything they had to make it work. As the days passed, The tension between the human and the alien woman only grew stronger. They had spent so many hours together, talking, learning about each other's worlds, but something was still holding them back. It was a deep, unspoken feeling that neither of them could easily express. The alien woman, who had once been so confident and proud, now seemed different. There was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a longing for something she couldn't quite put into words. She had come to Earth thinking she would only use humans for her mission, but now, after so many shared moments, she found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. The human, too, had changed. He had gone from seeing the alien woman as just a strange being to someone he was beginning to care for deeply. He had once feared the unknown, but now, in the company of the alien woman, he felt something far more complicated: affection, confusion, and even love. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the horizon, the alien woman stood near the window, looking out. The human walked up beside her, his steps soft and careful, as if afraid of disturbing the silence between them. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said quietly. "Not in a million years." The alien woman turned to face him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you, either," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "But here we are, and I don't know what it means anymore." The human reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers. "Maybe it means something good," he suggested, a small smile playing on his lips. The alien woman hesitated, her mind racing. For so long, she had been driven by a sense of duty, by her mission, by the rules of her people. But with him, she felt a different pull, one that made her question everything she had ever known. Slowly, she allowed her hand to rest in his, the contact sending a wave of warmth through her. She could feel the uncertainty between them, but there was also something else, something that felt right, something that she hadn't expected to find. "Maybe it does," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "Maybe it does." For the first time in a long while, both of them felt the weight of the unknown lift. In that quiet moment, they didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The night grew darker, but neither of them moved away. They stood together, side by side, as the world outside seemed to fade away. What would the future hold for them? They didn't know yet. But as they shared this small, quiet moment, they realized they didn't need to know everything right away. All they needed was each other. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Aiden and Vera had made their choice. They would try to change the course of the war, but the road ahead was filled with obstacles, both from within their own hearts and from the empire that surrounded them. Vera's decision to confront the council was a bold one. She had always been strong, unyielding in her rule, but now she was about to do something far more difficult. She was about to face her people with the truths about her doubts, about the peace she wanted, and about the sacrifice she was willing to make to end the war. Aiden stood beside her, more certain than ever of his commitment to the cause. But deep down, he could feel the weight of what they were about to face. The council would not go quietly. They would fight to keep their power, and they would do anything to stop Vera from breaking free of their control. The two of them walked together through the grand hallways of the palace, each step echoing in the silence. The tension between them was palpable, but it was different now. They were no longer just allies by circumstance. They were partners in a cause neither of them fully understood, but both of them believed in. When they reached the council chamber, the air felt thick with the weight of what was to come. The doors opened slowly, and Aiden couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in his stomach. Inside, the council was already waiting. The alien leaders sat in their high chairs, their eyes narrowed as they regarded Vera and Aiden. There was no welcoming gesture, no hint of understanding. Vera stepped forward, standing tall in front of the council, her posture strong yet tense. "I come before you not as your queen, but as a woman who wants peace for her people," she began. Her voice was steady, But there was a rawness in it that Aiden had never heard before. I have seen what the war has done to our world, and I can no longer stand by and watch us destroy everything we have fought to build. One of the council members, a tall, stern-looking alien with dark scales, sneered. You speak of peace as if it is something we can simply obtain with words. You know nothing of the cost of peace, Vera. We have fought to survive. We cannot afford to be weak now. Aiden felt the anger rising within him, but he knew better than to speak out. This was Vera's fight, and it was up to her to show them the path forward. Vera's eyes hardened, but she did not back down. I am not asking for weakness. I am asking for strength. The strength to stop the endless cycle of violence. The strength to choose a different path for our people. I am willing to sacrifice everything to make that happen, but I need your support. The room fell silent. For the first time, the council seemed unsure. A few members exchanged glances, and Aiden could see the tension in the air. Vera's words had reached them, but whether they would accept them was another matter. Finally, the head of the council, an older alien with piercing blue eyes, spoke. You speak of peace, but how can we trust that your decision is not born of weakness? How can we trust that you will not lead us to ruin? Vera took a deep breath, the weight of their distrust settling on her shoulders. I don't ask for your trust. I ask for your understanding. I have seen the destruction we have caused, and I know that if we continue down this path, we will only bring more destruction. I am willing to take the risk. Are you? The silence was deafening. The council members seemed frozen, unsure of how to respond. The decision hung in the balance. Aiden watched Vera, admiring her strength, even as he saw the uncertainty in her eyes. This was the moment of truth, the test of their will. Would the council accept change, or would they choose to cling to the old ways? And in that moment, Aiden knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The silence in the council chamber felt suffocating. Vera stood tall, her gaze steady, as the council members deliberated. Aiden stood behind her, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment they had been working toward, the moment that could change everything. For what felt like an eternity, no one spoke. The council members shifted in their seats, exchanging quiet glances, their eyes filled with doubt and suspicion. Aiden could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on Vera. She had placed everything on the line for this moment. Her throne, her empire, her very future. Then the head of the council, the one who had spoken earlier, leaned forward. His eyes met Vera's, his expression unreadable. You ask for peace, Queen Vera, but we are an empire built on strength, not compromise. If we abandon the path of conquest, we risk everything. Vera didn't flinch. Her voice was calm but unwavering. I know the cost. I have lived with it my whole life. But I can no longer stand by and watch my people destroy themselves in the name of power. Peace will require strength, but it will also require sacrifice, and I am willing to make that sacrifice. Aiden felt a surge of pride for her. She had said it so simply, yet it was the truth. Peace would not come without cost, but it was a cost worth paying. The council members exchanged more glances, whispering among themselves. Aiden held his breath, waiting for their response. Would they reject her? Would they choose war, as they always had? Finally, the council leader spoke again, his voice heavy with authority. You speak of sacrifice, but we have seen peace before, and it was not a path we could walk. If we give in to weakness, we risk the very foundation of our empire. We cannot follow your vision blindly. Vera's eyes darkened, but there was no anger in them. I do not ask you to follow blindly. I ask you to see the truth. We are at the edge of destruction. The war has already taken too much. We can either continue fighting, or we can build something new, something better. For a moment, the room was still. Aiden could see the conflict in the council members' eyes. They were being asked to choose between tradition and change, between the old ways of conquest and the possibility of peace. The decision wasn't easy, and it never would be. Then, a voice broke through the silence, a voice Aiden hadn't expected. It was one of the younger council members, a woman with bright green eyes and a strong, determined expression. She stood, her gaze fixed on the leader of the council. "Perhaps we have been too afraid of change," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "Perhaps it is time to listen. If we continue down this path, we will lose everything. The people are tired of war. They are tired of suffering. Maybe it's time we follow the Queen's vision, even if it means making a difficult choice." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. One by one, the council members began to nod, some reluctantly, others with a sense of quiet resolve. Aiden's heart raced. Was this really happening? The council leader looked around the room, his eyes lingering on each of his fellow members. Then, with a long, heavy sigh, he finally spoke. "Very well," he said, his voice thick with resignation. "We will follow the Queen's lead. But know this, Vera, this is a gamble. If peace fails, you will bear the blame, and the Empire will hold you accountable." Vera nodded, her expression unwavering. "I will bear that responsibility. But I believe in this path. I believe in the future we can build together." Aiden felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had done it. The council had accepted the possibility of peace, but there was still much work to be done. The war might be over, but the real challenge was just beginning, rebuilding, healing, and ensuring that the sacrifices they had made would lead to a better future for both their people. As the council meeting came to an end, Vera turned to Aiden. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something he hadn't seen before, a spark of hope. It wasn't just for her people, but for them both. "We did it," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. Aiden smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We did, but the real work starts now." Together, they walked out of the council chamber, knowing that their journey had only just begun. The road to peace would not be easy, but they were ready for it. They had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered.